Thank you, Madam Chair Lady. Ms. McDowell, I want to ask you a little bit about the backlog that you have in deferred maintenance and some of the infrastructure issues that the Park Service now faces. What steps is the Park Service taking to address this backlog?
So I think we've done a number of things. I think the work that's been done to get a handle on what the backlog is in the first place was the first significant move. I think you're seeing the Park Service now really focus its attention and resources on our high priority non-transportation deferred maintenance, those facilities that really are important for serving visitors, and working on ways to direct funding to those
Let me ask
facilities.
you.
Yes.
I want to get to some specific things here, maybe even generate some ideas. But when you say those significant, would you, what would those be? Would it be anything from a visitor facility to a road or a bridge?
So non-transportation are the things that I'm focusing on. So things like
Would that
visitor
include
centers.
a ferry?
Yes, visitor centers, bathrooms.
But when you say non-transportation, would that exclude ferries?
So the Park Service doesn't own many ferries. I think we're talking about buildings for the most part.
All right.
Yeah.
All right.
And trails to a lesser extent.
All right. One of the things that, looking through the background on this, is the leaseholder surrender interest. Is there a possibility that more private investment could help address some of the, or maybe even a significant portion of the infrastructure improvement needs?
I think in some of the concession-managed assets, there is certainly a role for the private sector. I think you see that in some of the longer concessions contracts that we have recently issued and that we're about to issue. There's the large lodging contract at Yellowstone that's 15 years that has a great deal of private investment associated with it.
Okay, does the Park Service own the lodge, or is that a private?
The Park Service does own the facility.
Is there any possibility that you could have a public-private partnership where a private entity owned the lodge?
I don't immediately know the answer to that.
That's one of the things that I think you might want to consider in addressing some of the backlog is, and again, if you take a look at the leaseholder surrender interest, and we could work out some arrangement where private entities own the facilities, and the contract or the agreement is structured in such a way that over the long term they would be able to not only recover their investment but earn a profit. It might take some of the burden off of the Park Service. Some of Mr. McCray or Klein or Mr. Beline, do you have any, and this is just in the context of some ideas that might help solve some of these problems and make your job a little bit easier? Mr. McCray?
Mr. Palmer, I can speak to that for a moment. One of the things that the 98 Act did do is provide for the ability to do some leasing. So from a practical standpoint, some of the projects and opportunities that require a much longer amortization period than is available under the concession contract could probably best be handled by leasing. And frankly, it might be a nice bridge between figuring out what the LSI solution is, because you do need a long period of time to amortize some of these investments, and it's really not provided the capability to do that within a shorter concession agreement. So clearly the leasing channel is one, and in the Golden Gate National Recreation Area we have two examples of that. One is the Argonaut Hotel and one is Cavallo Point. So the Park Service does have assets that can be leased, and probably with you know, some urging and some direction, they would probably do more of that.
Well, my perspective is that when you have a private interest in something and you basically own it, you've got more motivation to invest in it, keep it up, and I think it helps on the concession side. It helps in attracting visitors. I want to go back to Ms. McDowell on the fees. The Inspector General's office laid out some specific recommendations, some of which you have handled well. Where are you in the process of increasing the fees?
So we have finished, for the most part, the public engagement process that we go through before we make a decision to raise fees. Most parks that did engage in that conversation with the public have decided to raise fees, maybe not quite as much as they had proposed, but many of them are raising fees. I think we started seeing increases back in February, and most parks that were going to raise fees have raised them so far, usually after Memorial Day at the beginning of the season.
All right.
So we are moving forward.
Well, my time has expired. I would just like to conclude with this, to encourage the Park Service to look at these public-private partnerships as going forward as maybe a part of the solution. Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. McCray, in your testimony, you talked about that park visitation's been unchanged over 25 years despite a 30% increase in the population in the United States. And you raised some concerns that if you deducted the number of visitors to the World War II memorial and the newer monuments, that really park visitations is down below 1987 numbers. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
The population of the country has grown significantly over time. The visitation to the parks have not grown over that same period. If you think of the parks as 400 units that host 300 million visitors a year, $3 billion budget, and there's not a chief marketing officer. The word marketing in the parks, frankly, until Director Jarvis came along, was willing to use it, in public, was a verboten word there. Promotion, of course, is in the act, so they recognize the need for promotion. But the parks have an amazing brand, and they have amazing assets, and they have a huge number of visitors that want to come but don't know much about it. So there's some great opportunities to join with the National Parks Promotion Council and the National Park Foundation and Brand USA to promote the parks. And frankly, the visitation within the parks hasn't reflected the change in our population either. So there's some work that needs to be done there. And the Park Service, I think, has recognized that. And the Centennial has given them some opportunity to focus on it and try to find a way forward there, and we really encourage that and support that as concessioners. Within our parks, of course, we go out and promote the parks where we provide services, but that still leaves 300 parks that don't have anybody promoting them. So huge opportunity there in our view.
Sounds like we need a major marketing plan. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairman.